So let me share my thoughts in terms of deciding, is therapy right for my 3-year-old who just started stuttering? So I will tell you that just an hour ago, I was on a Skype appointment with a family, and their 2.5-year-old son just started stuttering. And even though he just started stuttering less than a month ago, I took the time to make an appointment for them because that's what they wanted. Other families I'm on the phone with this past week, I encourage them to consider, after I asked a couple questions, which I'll share with you, I asked them to consider waiting and giving it some time and taking some generic advice of what they could do to help their own kids with their own intuition and a couple tips of do's and don'ts. But I encourage them not to schedule an appointment. So I want to share with you, number one, there's no right way. There is a wrong way, which is to try to do a one-size-fits-all solution. The way to figure out who deserves which solution requires expertise and requires experience. But I'll share with you the way I look at it and the way I decide how I might guide a family. And the most important point comes from a principle, which is we may be the professionals and we may be the experts, but we're not the boss. A mother's intuition, a father's intuition, we're talking about a young child now, is the best knowledge and the best guide in the process. So the family that I saw today, whose child started stuttering less than a month ago, when I asked them, what is your level of concern, 1 to 10, the person contacting me was the father, which is not the more common scenario. And the father said, 1 to 10, I would say 15. And when it came to his wife, the mother, she said about a 10. Now, there's no way I can send them an email or a link that's going to take their concern from a 15 or a 10 down to a place where they can live with themselves, nor can I really help them deal with that level of concern and angst for the care of their child. So it's going to affect their interactions with their child. It's going to affect interactions between them. So in a family like that, irrespective of the child and the fact that the child is not struggling, the fact that the parents are in such stress about this youngster that they love, and all of a sudden his speech, he's stuttering with a severity of something between 1 to 10, they report it as a 7 or an 8, their level of concern is through the roof. And they would like to be able to talk to someone because they realize that looking at the internet is just giving them a lot of mixed messages, a lot of conflicting information, some good information, some bad information, and a whole lot of concern. And the pediatrician, in this case, didn't do anything, but the teacher at school said, well, maybe he's just thinking faster than he can talk. Why don't you slow down the way you talk to him? This didn't sit well for this mom. And for that reason, it was the right idea that they have a conversation with someone that could guide them, someone that knows a lot about children, preschool children who stutter, and what are some of the things that can be helpful, what are some of the things that could be less helpful, and most importantly, to demystify and de-horrify this very concerning and enigmatic behavior that this otherwise typically developing child, this beautiful, perfect child, I asked them, is this your oldest child? This is their only child. This is their everything. Mom left her career to be a full-time mom, and watching her child struggle is eating away at her. And so a combination of educating them about what it is and what it's not, what stuttering is and what it's not, framing it in terms of what it is, which is a physical issue, not an emotionally based issue for the most part, 99% of the time, not a cognitive issue, 99% of the time. Most of the time, stuttering is a neurophysiological issue, which involves the coordination of the signals and neurons in the brain, setting up the coordination of the speech mechanism. Of course, over time, it can develop and have other layers, but when we're talking about youngsters, very often, young children are not bothered by their stuttering. And these parents, their questions were, number one, what can we do to keep it that way? So our child continues to enjoy talking, and so our child continues to be unfazed by the fact that they have this interesting rhythm of interruptions and repetitions in their speech. And number two, what can we do as parents to, number one, get out of the way of natural recovery if the children is destined to grow out of it? Number two, what can we do to get in there to be proactive and be part of that process and be part of that solution. And so I think those are the two most important questions that parents can ask. Number one, what can I do to keep my child talking and make sure they continue to be unfazed by the fact that their speech pattern may be somewhat different? Young children are typically not bothered. Of course, over time, their feelings about communication can be shaped by the responses and the messages that they receive from the people around them. So parents can play a big role in sending the kind of messages and values that they want to transmit to their children. So the first thing is transmitting good communication values. The best way to transmit communication values is to plant them at the moments of opportunity. You don't teach values, you plant them. So when a child is stuttering, when a child is getting stuck, if we can listen to what the child has to say, if we can stay connected, if we can practice active listening at the moment that the child is getting stuck, we can send a very powerful message to that young child. And that message is, what you have to say is worth listening to, no matter how it comes out. I'm listening to what you have to say more than how you say it. And that's the most powerful way to help a child continue to be unfazed by what might be some stuttering or disfluency. And that's the most powerful way that a parent can really plant lifelong values of continuing to be confident and continuing to be comfortable, or as comfortable as possible with themselves, by letting them know that what they have to say is going to be heard and going to be attended to and responded to just like anyone else. Now, of course, these parents are also looking to see what can they do to help the child move through this and not develop further severity. And perhaps if there's anything they can do to help the child grow out of it, or grow out of it quicker than they might otherwise on the rate of a natural recovery. So here are the tips that I would suggest for parents. Number one, when the child is getting stuck, in this case, the example was the child says, I want the banana. So the first thing I suggested is to listen to the child and to respond to the child with what they requested. I met one young man, he was 20-something years old, and I kid you not, he told us that when he was younger, the way his parents responded was every time that would happen, his mother would give him a smack on the face. I'm sure she had the best intentions. She was not an abusive person. She believed that it was attention-seeking behavior, and she was trying to punish that behavior in the hopes that if she punished it, it would go away and he would stop doing that silliness. As a 25-year-old man who still stutters, I asked him at the end of the meeting, I said, what do you wish to tell your parents? And he said, I really don't need anything or want anything. I just wish my mom would understand it wasn't my fault. I wasn't doing it on purpose. So I think that speaks to the first message, which is if we can respond in a way where we listen, even when sometimes it's uncomfortable for us, but we listen to the human being, to the soul on the other side, that's the best thing we can do to send a message of communication values. And then in terms of what we really can do and the do's and the don'ts, number one, let's practice active listening. So let's talk about some strategies for active listening. Active listening tip number one, get down to the child's level, shoulder to shoulder. Very often we stand tall and the child's on the floor, or the child's sitting down, or our back may be to the child. When there's a difference in height, or we're not face to face, or we're in the front of the car, in the back of the car, there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't cause stuttering. But if we want to do something about the moment that the child's getting stuck, if we can close the gap and optimize the nature and the dynamics of the communication between ourselves and the child, very often that can make a big difference in the degree of struggle that the child may have. So number one, getting level with the child can be very, very helpful and a very good active listening tip. So the child is getting stuck. I might want to check and ask myself, where am I in position to the child? Tip number two, let's think about what's the sharing of the conversation. It's very important that we have parity and balance, perhaps sharing the conversation 50-50. So we do half the talking, child does half the talking. Situations where parents are doing all the talking, or a grandparent is grilling the child to perform, and the child is getting stuck, again, doesn't cause stuttering, but if the child is stuttering, that extra load that the child is feeling, either because they're talking the whole time and having to keep the whole conversation going or tell their story on and on, or the other end where they can't get a word in edgewise, maybe because other adults and other young people are not giving them a chance to talk. It creates a certain press in the communication. So again, if we can create parity of 50-50, sharing the conversation very often, that could be a helpful active listening tip. Active listening tip number 3, just like we get down at the child's physical level, get down at the child's cognitive level and language level. Talk to the child about things they care about and that they want to talk about. Follow their lead. So if they want to talk about trains or they want to talk about bugs, get right in there, as opposed to talking about what you want to talk about or introducing new ideas and steering it in a different direction. And similarly, when we have young children and we are a few years older than them, sometimes we forget and we behave like adults even when we're talking to young children. And we need to start to think about talking with the language complexity that matches the child, and also the complexity of the sentences and the length of sentences. There's no ironclad rule, there's no right way, but if you can match the level of your language to the child's language, if you can match the complexity and the length of your turn to the child's turn, that's what we're looking to do. And of course, we don't want to dumb things down or not stimulate the child to continue to explore and be curious and go further in their development. But it's important that we keep that just one step above. So just raise the rim ever so slightly and let them grow to that and then raise it again. But to make sure that there isn't this big gap between where the child's at and where we are at. So those are 3 active listening tips. As a final thought, I would recommend the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. In that book, you'll see cartoons, illustrations, and chapters that really talk about a lot of what I just talked about. A second book I would recommend is the book called Brain Rules. There's a book, Brain Rules, and there's a book, Brain Rules for Babies. That book is the most interesting. It's written in a way that's very easy to consume, but it's written by a scientist. There's no pop science in there. It's real hard science by someone I recommend and really respect. There's also great podcasts and other material around that book, and I highly recommend those 2 books. So How to Talk So Kids Will Listen by Faber and Maslish, and then Brain Rules. And I'm blanking on the author, but you can check it out.